guys, welcome back to the channel where we talk about all things books. My name is Chloe if you're new here, and it's great to have you. It is finally the end of January, the longest month of the year, and what a way to finish it than with the worst storm we have had all year. So it is absolutely miserable outside today. I am freezing cold, hence why I'm bundled up in this massive jumper. I have my blanket, I have a hot water bottle. I just cannot get warm today at all. But anyway, today's video is my January reading wrap up, the very first wrap up of the year, which I think is somehow more exciting. And I feel like I got off to a really good start with my reading this month. So I read a grand total of 10 books. 4 of those were physical books, 2 of them were graphic novels, and then the other 4 were audiobooks. So I feel like there's a healthy mix in there. Definitely glad that I leaned more towards the physical book side than the audiobooks. So I got quite a few ticked off of my TBR this month, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through them all in order that I read them. There's a healthy mix of star ratings as well. I did have a 5-star read this month. Most of them were between sort of 3.5 to 4 stars, and then I did have a 2-star read, but we'll get to that in a second. So without further ado, go grab your favourite drink and let's get started. So the first book that I finished this month was Iron Gold by Piers Brown, and I gave this 4.5 stars. Now this is one of the audiobooks that I read or listened to this month. It is technically the 4th book in the Red Rising saga, but it's book 1 of the continuation. So for anyone that doesn't know, the Red Rising saga is an epic space opera that follows our main character Darrow, who is a lowborn rebel that rises against the oppressive caste system in the solar system. And this sparks a revolution that ripples across the galaxy, basically. It is brutal, it is complex, and it's utterly gripping, in my opinion. It's one of my all-time favourite series. It is a tale of war and power and the price of freedom. So, like I said, you have the initial Red Rising trilogy and then the continuation that starts with Iron Gold, and that takes place 10 years after the end of book 3 in the first trilogy. So it's a return to the Red Rising saga, and it deepens the lore whilst including new characters and reintroducing old characters, but with a decade's worth of scars and complexities. And it's just an exhilarating ride, but one that kind of left me wrestling a little bit with its pacing and its purpose, at least for this book. So let's start with the characters. Now, like I said, our main character is Darrow, and that is still the case in book 4. He is, in my opinion, the ultimate tortured hero. Very few authors, in my opinion, can handle a morally grey character as brilliantly as Piers Brown. And I don't think that Darrow's any exception. In Iron Gold, he is far more complex and complicated than he was 10 years previously. His decisions definitely toe the line between brilliance and madness for most of it. But I trust Piers Brown to reveal the method to Darrow's madness as we go on. This book, though, definitely had me questioning his judgment more often than I was rooting for him, but I don't think we see Darrow's true brilliance until he reaches rock bottom, and I feel like by the end of this book we were only just getting there. There's also a few other characters mentioned, so if you don't want to be spoiled for any of the characters in it, then maybe just skip ahead a little bit. But Lysander, who honestly is one of my most hated characters ever. His chapters, for me in this book, just felt like an exercise in patience. I won't lie, by the end I found that he was just really grating on my nerves more than anything. Conversely, there is another character, Lyria, that we're introduced to in this book, who she started out as a little bit of a chore for me, but I feel like by the end of it I actually really started to grow and like her character a lot more. Along with another character who her story arc is intertwined with, Ephraim. They both became more interesting as the book went on. However, I feel like the real brilliance of Iron Gold is in its writing and its storytelling. I think Pierce Brown's ability to weave together very intricate plots and characters is just unparalleled. And while this book kind of felt a little bit more like a stage setter for what's to come, I think it's still a testament to his brilliance that even the setup is still amazing. So the 10-year time jump just adds layers of complexity to these returning characters. That said, I did find myself wanting a little bit more payoff in this one. So it's definitely clear that he's playing the long game with this book. And whilst I trust the upcoming books will deliver, spoiler for what's to come, Iron Gold felt more like a bridge rather than the actual destination, for me at least. Also, I feel like we can't forget the unsung heroes of this series, Several and Victra. These two need their own spin-off. I honestly could read just a whole book of those two with some howlers thrown in as well, because it's just chaos anytime those two are together in a scene, and I love it. It's amazing. So overall, I think Iron Gold wasn't the 5-star read that I was hoping that it would be, but it's still a phenomenal entry in the Red Rising trilogy, and I think it sets the stage perfectly for the conclusion that's still to come. If you're wondering whether or not you should continue on with the continuation of the series, then absolutely do it, because you will not be disappointed. The next book I have is Mother of Shadows by Meg Ann. I keep going to say Meg Ryan. That's not who wrote this book at all. Meg Ann. Now, this was another audiobook that I listened to and I gave it 2 stars. Buckle up. Because Mother of Shadows does not waste any time throwing you head first into the world of chosen everything. So our main character, Helena, is the long lost chosen queen of her chosen kingdom that she's whisked away to rule over her chosen people, to fulfill her chosen destiny. The universe does a lot of choosing in this book. In the span of 2 pages, and I'm not exaggerating, it was by page 2. She goes from this humble peasant who loves gardening to the most powerful, beautiful, awe-inspiring queen that the kingdom's ever seen, and all of her chosen people love her. Her aqua eyes were mentioned so many times in this book that I actually considered turning it into a drinking game at one point just to get me through, and then I realised that I would be blackout on the floor before we got to chapter 2, and that probably wasn't the best idea, so we scrapped that one, but it was a lot. So let's talk about Helena's journey, or lack thereof. She's instantly good at everything. Elemental magic, she's a master of all 5. So there is water, wind, fire, earth and spirit, because why stop at 4? But she can do them all amazingly. Leadership, yep, she can do that too. She is a natural born queen and everyone worships her on sight. It's almost like the book pressed fast forward on all of the fun parts. There was no build up, there was no struggle, there was no training montages. Where was the satisfying arc from peasant to powerhouse? It just wasn't there. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that she's beautiful and has really nice aqua eyes? And then there was the romance. Ah, yes. The insta-love to end all insta-loves. Helena meets her mate, which is another word that they use constantly, so if you're gonna read this book, prepare for the cringe. And by their third meeting, yes, 3, 1, 2, 3, she's already staken her claim with the whole dramatic "you're mine." Oh, okay, Helena, you need to calm down. It was too much. You're coming on a little bit strong here. Quite frankly, you're gonna scare him away. I barely know this guy, and you certainly don't know him, so let's just pause for a minute. Speaking of her mate, Vaughn, he is described as this dangerous, rugged, battle-scarred man. But what battle? There was no background. There is literally zero context of the lore in this world to explain why anything has happened. There was no history. There was just nothing. And I found it really hard to care about a setting that was just so underdeveloped. Also, just to circle back for a minute, can we talk about the trend of fantasy fantasy heroines having like cutesy hobbies? Helen is all about gardening because of course she is, but why is it always like gardening or painting or baking or something else adorable? Why can they not, like, I don't know, stamp collecting or woodworking? You know, like, it's always something really cute. I suppose though, I prefer that to the stabby female main character. Looking at you, Poppy. But honestly, I fear we may progress to that as that series continues. Not that I'll know because I won't be reading it, but I have a feeling she could also be a stabby gardener. And then there was the ending. It was... the big cliffhanger was supposed to be very dramatic, but honestly I just didn't care. By that point I was just glad that it was over. By the time I got there I was just so detached from the whole thing that it just didn't land the way that it was obviously meant to. So overall, after that big ramble, I would say that Mother of Shadows kind of feels like it skips all of the foundations that makes a fantasy story immersive and compelling. But if you're here for some over-the-top chosen one shenanigans and insta-love drama, then it might scratch your itch. But if you are looking for in-depth build-up or a well-developed world, it's probably not for you. I'm sorry. Moving on then to the first physical book that I finished this month, and I read The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. Now, this was actually the first book that I started reading, but it's just such a huge book that it took me forever to get through it. But this one kept me hooked just as much as The Final Empire did, which is saying a lot considering how much I loved that first book. That being said, I did give this a solid 4.5 stars, instead of the anticipated 5-star that I thought this was going to be. And that's because about a quarter of the way in, I feel like things started to slow down a little bit. Just enough for me to notice it, but not enough to ruin the overall experience for me. But let's start with the good stuff. So there's a lot. The characters are still absolutely the heart of this story. Vin is as badass as ever, with her mix of raw power and vulnerability, just making her, in my opinion, one of the most compelling characters that I've ever read. Elend is a bit annoying, I'm not gonna lie, but kind of in an endearing sort of way. Like, he annoys me, but I like it. It's a skill, I swear. And Straff is just a piece of shit. Quite frankly, he is a true villain that you love to hate. And the whole book, I was just waiting for his demise, just praying for his downfall, because he's just awful. The rest of the crew was just as great as ever. They bring so much life to the story, and their dynamic is just as sharp and entertaining as they were in book one. A minor complaint that I had is that there was one character in particular that I wish we got more of, because I think he could have been very interesting, but he didn't get enough screen time. And I don't want to tell you who it was because I feel like it's a bit of a spoiler, but there was one sort of main adversary that Vin had that if you've read the book you'll know who I'm talking about. I wish we saw more of him. That's my only complaint re characters. One thing that I think Brandon Sanderson absolutely nails is his ability to plant seemingly random, insignificant tidbits early on, like things that you wouldn't even think twice about, and then have them explode into major plot points or mind-blowing revelations later on. Honestly, the payoff is just so satisfying, and it's one of my favourite aspects of his writing. I think another highlight of the book is how well it handles the aftermath of the final battle. It doesn't treat it like just another day at the office for these characters. They are scarred and shell-shocked, and they're questioning their belief systems, and they're just utterly traumatised. And I think their trauma feels real, and it adds so much depth to the story and the people in it. Just seeing how they process, or struggle to process in some cases, what they've been through really makes the stakes feel even higher. So overall, I think The Well of Ascension was spectacular. I will be devouring the next book in this series very, very soon. I hope. That's the plan anyway. The next book I read was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett, and I gave this a 4 stars. This was a 5-star prediction. If you watched my 5-star prediction video at the start of the month, then you will have seen this. But sadly, it missed the mark. But only just. This book is just a charming mix of cozy fantasy and light academia, and I really enjoyed it, but I definitely have some thoughts. First of all, let's talk about the 2 main characters, Emily and Wendell. Their dynamic is just absolutely the highlight of this book. I think the banter between them at times is genuinely funny, and I think their personalities complement each other and clash in all the right ways. It's a very classic Grumpy Sunshine vibe, but with a little bit of a twist, and I think it works really well. Also, special shout out to Poe, who I loved. I wish we got to see more of, because I just thought that little interactions between Poe and Emily were really cute. The side characters, in my opinion, though, felt a little bit I'm not sure. I was just a bit indifferent about them. They were good, they were okay, but I wouldn't particularly care if something happened to them. You know, that sort of vibe. One of my major gripes of the book was its pacing. So for most of the book, it has this really sort of cozy, slow-paced energy. Emily's out in the field and she's trying to document fairies and grudgingly dealing with Wendell's antics. And honestly, I was here for it. But then in the last 50 to 75 pages, it suddenly veers off into very unexpected territory. All of a sudden, it ups the stakes and the world became far more perilous, which normally I'm all in for, like absolutely give me all of the action. But because of how the first half of the book started, the pacing just felt really off. You know, after 250 pages of cozy build-up, the action felt really rushed and glossed over, and I kind of found myself wishing that there was more detail. And certainly wishing there was a lot more tension in those final chapters, and it just ultimately didn't deliver. And I have to say, I feel like the format of this book feels like a missed opportunity. just imagine if you had the same book, like how it was, where she's going through writing all of her field notes and everything, but it's done like an actual journal or like a diary, you know, where you've got like, I mean, she writes it in first person, so she's writing it like a diary entry, like this is what I did today, blah, 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 blah. But imagine if you had like the handwritten notes and bits of it were crossed out and there was diagrams and pictures and little notes in the margins, you know. If anybody has read the Illumine files, that's kind of what I'm getting at, you know, this sort of like multimedia feel to it. I think that would have been amazing. And that kind of creative formatting, in my opinion, would have added so much more charm and personality to this book. But that's just my thoughts. All of that said, I did really like the book and I'm absolutely planning on continuing on with the series. I already have book 2 and can't wait to read it. I just hope that the next installment decides what it wants to be. You know, either take your time with the big plot points and flesh them out completely, even if that means sacrificing a little bit of the cozy vibes, or fully commit to the coziness throughout the whole thing. I think a balance between the two, however, would make this series truly magical. So we can hope. Next up, I read volumes 5 and 6 of the Saga? I never know how to say this. I read Saga volumes 5 and 6 by Brian Vaughan. Okay, there, fab. I gave both of them 4 stars. For anyone that doesn't know, Saga is a space opera meets family drama graphic novel series. And it follows our main characters Alana and Marco, who are these star-crossed lovers from a warring species, you know, so one of them, they each come from different sides of the war. And they're trying to navigate their love in the midst of this war and parenthood at the same time, and trying to keep their family together, and it's just great. I love it, and I'm slowly making my way through this series every time I can get my hands on a new copy. I've got up to volume 5. I have up to volume 9, so I still need to try and find volumes 11 and 10, 11 and 12. I'm not sure if 12 is out yet, but yeah, so slowly making my way through. I think volumes 5 and 6 were solid entries in the series. The storylines for most of the characters are very engaging, with the exception of 2 of them in volume 6. There's a sort of paparazzi journalist duo that honestly I just don't care about, but for the rest of the characters I'm really enjoying their story arcs. Volume 6 also had a couple of time jumps that felt a little bit jarring and for me kind of disrupted the story a bit, but not to the point that it made it unenjoyable. Also, if you are going to read this series, just fair warning, volume 6 doesn't hold back in the graphic aspect of the graphic novel. There's a lot of nakedness on show, so just keep that in mind before diving in, you know, maybe don't read it at your grand's house when you're round for Sunday dinner. You've been warned. Next up we have Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Lani Taylor, and I gave this 3.75 stars. Now, this is book 3 and the conclusion to the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, and it is a stunning fantasy series that follows our main character Karu, who is an art student with a mysterious past, and our other main character Akiva, who is a seraph or angel warrior, and their worlds collide in the midst of a centuries-old war between angels and chimera. I think this is possibly one of my favourite fantasy series of all time. I finally finished this book this month though, after it being partially read for over a year. And whilst I liked it, and yes, I do still think it's one of my favourite series, I just think I made a huge mistake by leaving such a long time in between reading the books. By the time that I picked this one up again this year, I wasn't as emotionally invested in the series as what I was when I started. And I think that made it quite difficult to fully immerse myself back into this world. That being said, the plot is still one of the most unique that I've ever come across in fantasy, and I think Lani Taylor's beautiful lyrical writing style really carried it through, even if it started to feel a little bit much towards the end. So the last 100 pages dragged more than I would have liked it to. The prose, which I usually love, just became a little bit too heavy, and the ending just felt so stretched out, like way longer than it needed to be. But I think despite that, I still think it's a fantastic conclusion to the series, and if you haven't read this trilogy yet, I highly, highly recommend that you do. It is just magical and heartbreaking and just so original that it's well worth your time. Next up, we have another audiobook, and it was Dark Age by Piers Brown, and this was my 5-star read of the month. So this is book 5 in the Red Rising saga that follows Iron Gold, and can I just say, Dark Age was bloody damn incredible. It was obviously my first 5-star read of the year, and the storylines for all of the characters were just absolutely brilliant. And although there was some new characters that kind of made it a little bit difficult to keep up with at times, I managed it. I just about clung on and I loved every second of it. I've seen a lot of reviews on Goodreads since I've finished this though, complaining about the amount of violence, and yes, there is a lot in this book, but honestly, we're in the middle of an interplanetary war. War is messy and it's gruesome and it's relentless, and I think Piers Brown actually captured that perfectly without going overboard or it feeling repetitive, at least in my opinion. Lysander in this book still irritates me like to no end. I hate that man so much. But like I said, for Iron Gold, Lyria was an absolute highlight for me. I loved her characters and I just wish she got a little bit more screen time, because her character arc by the end of this book was absolutely one of my favourites. I definitely hope that we get more of her in the next book. Same with Virginia. I also really liked reading from her point of view and hope we get to see some more of that for the next few. This book was just an absolute masterpiece. It was just full of tension and twists and heartbreak, and I already cannot wait to get into the next one. It probably won't be in this upcoming month because I have plans for February, but you best believe I will be reading it, or at least listening to it, very, very soon. Are you ready for the next book? Because I don't think that I am. The next book that I finished this month needs no introduction, and it was Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I think I have just about managed to collect myself and actually put together some coherent thoughts on it, and let me tell you, I have a lot of thoughts about this book. This series needs no introduction, but for anybody who doesn't know, Onyx Storm continues the Fourth Wing, or the Empyrean series as it's actually called. It follows Violet, our main character, as she navigates the politics and battles and betrayals of a dragon riding war college that she attends, whilst also uncovering some secrets of her world that could just change the course of all their lives forever. It took me a really long time to settle on a rating for this book, and I'm still somewhere in between 3.75 and 4 stars. I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards the 4 because I gave Iron Flame 3.75 and I think this is a lot better than that, but I still don't think it's a 5-star book. I have very mixed feelings about this. So you might want to go get a refill of your drink because we might be here for a while. On the positive side, I enjoyed it a lot more than Iron Flame, like I said. Violet and Xaden didn't annoy me as much in this one as they did in book 2. Some of their conversations were actually quite sweet, if not still very repetitive, and at times they did get on my nerves with the whole back and forth thing that they're having. Like, the conflict between them in this one is how they can't have sex because Xaden doesn't know if he'll be able to control himself around Violet. And it's just like, guys, there's a war going on. People are dying. Can we maybe just pull ourselves together here? You've not had sex in like 2 weeks. It's not that deep. Come on. Like, have you actually been in a relationship before? That's not that long. That aside, I liked the attempt at world building. So the story expanded to new areas as they travelled to different islands and parts of their world. By far the absolute highlight of the book for me was the banter between Tarn and Andarna. They're hilarious together, and I have said it before, but I will happily read a whole book just on their conversations in the Vale because I just think that they're amazing. That said, the pacing wasn't great. We travelled to all of these new places, but it felt like we spent barely any time actually exploring them and getting to know their history or their politics. And more of the focus was on actually travelling to get there. Which just, it made it all, it was a roller coaster of, it just wasn't good. The ending also was frustratingly similar to Iron Flame. It obviously wasn't exactly the same, and I don't want to say too much because of spoilers, but the more I think about it, the less it feels like a cliffhanger and more like a cop-out, because it just wasn't fleshed out enough. There were too many threads that were just left dangling. The main villain, I think, in this one had a lot of potential, but again, it just wasn't fleshed out enough. We didn't see enough of her, we didn't get enough of her backstory, and we didn't get to find out who she was or why she was the way that she was, and you know, like, there just wasn't enough detail, and the bits that there should have been lots of detail, but then other parts of it that were insignificant were really over emphasized and dragged out. There was also times throughout the book that I was just genuinely confused as to what the fuck was going on. And I don't know if that's just a me problem, but there were so many times that characters were mentioned or places were mentioned or events, and I had no idea when this happened or who it was or where it was that they were talking about, and it just felt really disjointed. Like, I was having to go back and try and find out what context this was mentioned in, but then it wasn't there because there was no context. And I don't know if that was maybe just because I didn't reread Fourth Wing and Iron Flame first, or if it genuinely wasn't explained very well. I just don't know, but there was a lot of it that was confusing, and it kept like really pulling me out of the story for a lot of this book. But don't get me wrong, there were some fantastic action scenes and some really emotional moments. Like, there was a good few scenes towards the end, and one chapter in particular that actually just made me cry. It was so emotional, it was really well written, but I just feel like they were too few and far between to really make this book stand out. I honestly don't think that this series needs to be 5 books. I think it was originally supposed to be a trilogy, and it should have stayed like that. I think if we had kept up the pacing for book 1 throughout books 2 and 3, we could have easily combined the two and then just had an epic conclusion as the third and final book. And I'm a little bit concerned that there's not going to be enough material plot-wise to actually carry us through 2 more books. I remain hopeful, because I'm still really invested in this story and I still found it enjoyable, and I'm going to continue the series to see how it ends. I'm just a little bit worried that it's going to fall flat. I hope I'm wrong, I really hope I'm wrong, and I hope that the next 2 books are just epic and amazing, but we'll see. Alright then, the last book of the month is another audiobook. So I ended January by finishing The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson, and I gave this 3 stars. This was a solid read. It was enjoyable, I liked it, it was okay. So this is Holly Jackson's latest standalone mystery, and it follows our main character Belle, who is a young girl whose mum Rachel went missing 16 years prior. And the family are now doing a documentary about Rachel when all of a sudden she reappears. But Belle isn't convinced that all is as it seems. This one, it wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't on the same level as A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. My main gripe was Belle herself. I just didn't gel with her at all. She comes across as very bratty and impulsive, and she just... One of my biggest pet peeves of just life in general is people who interrupt, and she constantly interrupts people when they're about to give her crucial information. And honestly, half of this book could have been avoided if she just shut up and let people finish a sentence. It was so frustrating. I also think that the twist at the end was less of a twist and more just like a slight bend. It didn't blow me away at all, and it felt a little bit predictable, to be honest. But that said, if you take this book for what it is, i.e. a fun, light mystery, it's still a really enjoyable read. Whilst I don't think it reached the heights of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, for me it's definitely worth picking up if you're in the mood for just a really quick, fun, entertaining whodunit. So yeah, definitely pick it up if you've not read it already and you like Holly Jackson's writing. And that's it, guys. That's all 10 books that I finished in the month of January. I really hope you liked this video. Please let me know in the comments down below what your favourite reads were in January, and if you have any book recommendations for me going into next month. If you like this video, please also consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you want to see more bookish content from me. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye.